Thank you, and welcome everyone. We can move to the next slide. I'm Letitia Younger-Cannon, your moderator for today's AESP webinar, Win-Win-Win, How Demand Flexibility and Pay for Performance Delivers on Engagement and Savings. As Anastasia mentioned, I'm a director at Guidehouse, and I'm very excited to bring you this great slate of speakers today to talk about an important and emergent topic in our industry. We are lucky to feature my Guidehouse colleague, Sam Crawford, Matt Burton from Recurve, Landon Williams from Duke Energy, Joey Landy from CE, and Andrew Kraus from Northern Pacific Power. We have a lot to cover today, so we'll go ahead and get going. So as I mentioned, we have several items on our agenda today to walk you through the ins and outs of demand flexibility and pay for performance programs, also known as P4P. We'll touch on how this approach works from an implementation, utility, and trade ally lens to give you a comprehensive view of how demand flexibility can be applied in various settings. Also, this wouldn't be an AESP webinar if there wasn't some form of audience participation, so watch out for polls throughout the webinar. And please be sure to use the control panel to submit your questions, and we'll hold a panel discussion at the end. And also, just so you know, as we're going along, if you have a question, go ahead and submit it and we'll add it to our list and keep track of them as we go. With that out of the way, I think we can dive in. So don't say I didn't warn you. For our first audience poll, we want to get a sense of where people land in terms of agreement with the following statement. EEDSM, or Energy Efficiency and Demand Side Management programs, need to change significantly in order to survive in the future. So using a scale of 1 to 5 for your responses, with 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree, we can launch the poll and capture your thoughts. All right, so responses are coming in, and it looks like so far most people tend to agree that that we do need a change. There's a small group that are kind of on the disagree camp, and kind of in the middle. Oh, and the more coming in, yeah. So yeah, there's definitely some diversity of opinion here, but leaning towards agree. So it'll be interesting to see where things land as we go along here. And thank you for your responses. As I mentioned, we'll factor this in as we move along. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Sam Crawford. He's an Associate Director in Energy Sustainability and Infrastructure at Guidehouse. He's helped utilities, technology, and service providers and investors and government to identify, evaluate, and capture opportunities associated with emerging technologies and business models for the evolving power grid. Sam has particular expertise in energy storage, distributed energy resources, microgrids, and utility information and operational technology systems. He has developed tools and processes to support techno-economic analysis and business model development, project development, due diligence, procurement, and program implementation associated with these technologies. He earned his PhD in material science and engineering at MIT and graduated summa cum laude with a BS in chemical engineering from Washington University in St. Louis. And he'll be speaking on driving outcomes with DER markets. So Sam, take it away.
Thank you, Letitia, and thank you all for joining. I'll start out here by providing some high-level context about why and how to integrate market-based approaches into EEDSM programs, and then others on the panel will dig into some more tactical details and examples. So starting out on the next slide with the big picture here. It seems, for most of you, I don't have to convince you that there's a need for change, but regardless, I'll try to show here, how programs could be more effective. So traditional programs have certainly been impactful historically, but they are starting to reach their limits. So there's saturation of certain measures like lighting, There's slower adoption of newer measures, and there's also growing challenges with cost effectiveness after some of the low-hanging fruit is taken up. So new structures are going to be needed in order to continue to drive adoption. At the same time, the market and regulatory climate is changing. Supply is decarbonizing. Technologies for electrification and load flexibility are maturing. And with all of this, regulators are accordingly beginning to shift their focus from energy and demand savings to decarbonization. However, with the growth of DERs and aging infrastructure, this is increasingly causing constraints on the grid. But with increased data and intelligence available, DER growth can be supported in a grid beneficial fashion. With traditional approaches for programs, typically it's designing a set of discrete prescriptive programs, putting out RFPs to procure individual implementers that have discrete offerings and partners, sticking it out with that structure for a few years and seeing if it worked, and then if not, tweaking it a few years later. So this approach requires utilities to try to pick the winners up front, both in terms of the measures and the companies that implement those measures. And additionally, having a fragmented set of prescriptive programs can be difficult for trade allies to navigate. It can limit offering for customers, and it can drive a focus on measures over what customers and buildings need most. Looking to emerging DER markets, shifting away from traditional programs, market-based approaches have a variety of advantages. First of all, instead of picking one winner, many companies can participate and the best ones rise to the top. Also, new offerings can be readily integrated over time. It's not necessary to wait for the next 3-year program cycle. And then with a non-prescriptive structure that's focused on services and outcomes for the utility over measures and incentives that are tied to those services, trade allies have the flexibility and incentive to bring the best offerings that maximize savings for both the utility and their customers. And these are not necessarily new concepts. These principles are actually quite similar to how wholesale markets are structured, and those have been proven to deliver reliable outcomes based upon economic signals. Now, if we look to the next slide, it gives a general picture for what this P4P marketplace looks like and what it offers. So ultimately, a pay-for-performance or P4P marketplace, which incentivizes outcomes over widgets, aligns the interests of all parties and makes it more attractive to everyone. Utilities get the outcomes that they want by creating opportunities for trade allies to make money by delivering outcomes, which requires them to deliver compelling solutions to customers that deliver savings cost effectively. So this is the high-level picture, but I'll walk through each component of this diagram to illustrate really how this works. On the next slide, we'll start off with a focus on the grid benefits, which really are tied to the different demand flexibility services out there. This is really the starting point for any program or market in looking to what it is that a utility is specifically trying to accomplish from among these different options on the table. And these are categorized into 4 areas here. Baseload shaping is comparable to generation baseload. So EE is a demand flexibility resource. Electrification is also a resource. These drive daily changes in load shapes. Peak reduction is essentially demand response, and it drives cost savings on peak days. Locational markets can effectively be another form of demand response, but they drive infrastructure deferral and can help to increase hosting capacity to accommodate things like more distributed renewables, more electrification, and then decarbonization can have incentives that help to achieve policy requirements and/or utility or corporate goals. Now, moving along to the incentives on the next slide, tying these to performance, whatever the target outcome, the incentives can be designed to be inherently cost effective based upon the avoided cost that those demand flexibility services deliver, whether that's dollars per kilowatt hour, per kilowatt, per ton CO2, whatever it is, you can set a cost-effective price signal and then measure the actual savings at the meter based on the measured load relative to baseline. And Matt Burton will be speaking more about specifically how Recurve does this. And then these incentives drive the market to actually focus on the customers and solutions which offer the greatest savings potential. And this ultimately creates a growth opportunity for high-performing trade allies. Now, next, if we look at the energy solutions that deliver those grid benefits, on the next slide, with a focus on outcomes, it becomes less important which widget is delivering those outcomes. It just matters what savings are happening at the meter. By reducing prescription, trade allies can freely leverage the best mix of solutions for a given customer, all within a single program. And trade allies have the freedom to offer different types of business models to help drive customer adoption, things like financing or shared savings and revenue. And the trade allies that have the most attractive solutions for customers that deliver the best outcomes for the utility are going to naturally rise to the top. Now, on the next slide, a key piece of this, in driving outcomes is the marketplace approach, allowing a large tent or wide funnel to effectively crowdsource the best solutions for customers. So rather than having a narrow set of predetermined companies participate, this can be opened up to have a variety of different participants. And there may be certain niches. Certain trade allies may be better with different customer needs or segments. But effectively, this is a platform approach, analogous here to different types of other offerings in the market. So the traditional approach for the utility is to try to curate a selected set of offerings through a bunch of discrete programs. And this is similar to BlackBerry with apps or Barnes and Noble with books. There's pre-selected measures, implementers, and solution providers. The marketplace is more of a platform approach that's more like the iPhone or Amazon, where there's a wide variety of different solutions available from different providers. And this ultimately drives innovation, increases customer choice, and drives greater customer engagement and therefore greater outcomes for the utility. And in the last slide here, to just sort of bring this full circle and come back to those points for each of these parties, I hope it's clear now how this approach drives better outcomes for all parties. Utilities get what they want cost effectively, and the same approach can be scaled up to address different types of needs, different customer segments, and so forth as time goes on. Trade allies have the opportunity to innovate while also being able to be offered programmatic resources like customer targeting support, which again, Matt will speak more to, and things like financing offerings that can be offered to customers through a variety of different trade allies. And ultimately, this creates an attractive growth opportunity for high performers. With customers, they're able to access more options, and not just more options, but more tailored and attractive offerings that will deliver them greater savings. And these can be made more accessible, for example, again, through programmatic financing offerings that mitigate first cost barriers. So that does it for an overview of these market-based approaches to utility programs. Note that what I've laid out here is not all or nothing. These types of approaches can be tailored to meet the particular needs of any utility, incorporating different elements as appropriate. And I think we'll see that as we look through some of the examples later on from some of the other presentations. So I will now turn it over to Matt Burton to talk about Recurve's software platform and how it enables these types of marketplaces.
That was great. Thanks, Sam. So as you mentioned, we'll bring Matt Burton in now. He's the Vice President of Sales and Business Development at Recurve. He's driven innovation in energy for over 10 years as a reformed engineer. Matt has built, designed, and developed power plants and microgrids with a strong focus on energy market analytics and economic optimization. Now working in demand flexibility, Matt's passion lies in bringing supply-side assetization to behind-the-meter resources. Today, Matt will present Driven by Philosophy, Demand Flexibility, and Advanced Analytics. Matt, take it away.
Excellent. Thanks, Letitia. Thanks, Sam. Excellent overview of everything. And just really appreciate everybody listening in here today. So we can keep moving. Let's ignore this headshot with the man bun. We'll get into the weeds of things. So I love hearing that we're all very philosophically aligned here, right? So I think this joint mission we're all on to really get the most value out of the demand side of the space involves exactly what Letitia just pointed out in that introduction, bringing equivalence from the supply side assets and the way those markets operate into the demand side as well. So of course, on some big power plant, you're going to have current transformers, voltage transformers. You're going to measure exactly what's going on there. But when we flip that whole paradigm on its head and we say, well, we're going to treat energy reduction the same as we're going to treat production, what does that really mean? How can we do that? And the answer starts with data. We need the data to be able to determine what those real savings could be so that we can aggregate this up and say, hey, these aren't just, various like HVAC retrofits and, insulation projects and smart thermostats. This is a real virtual power plant. So that's everything that, Recurve is built on. So, while everyone's covering a lot of great angles of this today, I'm going to focus here on the platform and how we take this data and turn it into something that's going to really assetize all these behind the meter resources. So, everything Recurve has built has been founded in utilizing AMI meter data to build up these counterfactual baselines so we can understand very accurately in an open source, auditable, transparent way what's really being delivered at the meter. So, we were really heavily involved in the institution of Caltrack and that development. That led to the development of Open EE Meter, fully open sourced, baselining methodology that lives with the Linux Foundation for Energy. And that's really where we just got started and built our platform off of and have continued building on that. So, you see some names here, Open Grid Meter, comparison groups, very important if we're going to aggregate these resources to net out exogenous impacts. This hasn't always been top of mind, but then of course, COVID hit us. And well, now a bunch of businesses are shutting down. If we're baselining meters off of what they previously read, well, we should compare this against what's happening across the population. And that's something that we're doing in a very transparent open source way today. And a few other components here. Privacy is a big factor. So energy differential privacy, if we're publishing results, making sure that we protect PII. A lot of bits and pieces here, but really I just want to hit on the point that the data matters and how we use that data and protect that data also matters. So with this, I think we'll keep moving here and get in a little bit to how we're turning all this data into a real platform that can support and automate these kinds of virtual power plants and demand flexibility markets. So next slide, there we go, very good. So there's really three key components to the Recurve platform. Number one is resource planning. Pulling in that data and understanding where we're gonna get the most bang for the buck is really important. So that's step number one. So I think if we click again, we'll see number two, fleet management, right? We wanna see all of these assets in an apples to apples comparison. We wanna understand on a real-time basis what's happening at the meter, what's being realized, what are those results, and making sure all stakeholders are informed of that. And then number three, really important, ledger. Really a QuickBooks for energy, transactable energy component. Because I think it was alluded to earlier, financing. The way they finance a power plant, project-based financing hasn't really lived too much in the demand side space, and that's something that's really coming to the forefront. So not a big topic to get into today, but just knowing that we can translate kilowatt hours, kilowatts into something that's transactable, that everyone can agree to and follows all kinds of compliance rules, that's very important for us. So these are the three components of our platform that underlies these demand flexibility programs. So we're going to dig in briefly into each one of these if we go to the next slide here. All right, resource planning, really important. So, under maybe a deemed savings world, there's a calculation and we say, okay, here's what we estimate and the average savings to be from this project. Well, in this situation, we're using actual meter data. So, before we just start throwing projects in the ground, we want to understand, well, who actually is the best fit? Because not only in this case do we want to realize grid benefits, of course, there's a strong relationship between grid benefits and what's going to realize on a customer's bill. And that's one of the most important things. There's folks that are getting the benefits of these projects, and we want to make sure those benefits are realized. So, who's peaking hugely in the afternoon and also has a huge HVAC load. We're doing that disaggregation. We can see who's spending a lot on cooling. We can see through the load archetyping who's really spending that energy in the afternoon. And we can down select that list and say, well, here's our top 10%. Let's go after those folks. We're showing an example here of similar targeting for evening ramp for a commercial program. And we're seeing like 2.5 times energy savings, perhaps most importantly, giant peak reduction. And what's important, you can see that little bar chart at the bottom there. The value of those savings on the grid in those hours is much, much more important. And that's really what we want to target, as I stated before. GHG is another really important component of this as well. So really no shortage of use cases. Is somebody a solar customer that's dipping heavily in the middle of the day? Maybe they'd be great for batteries. So this is really foundational into the beginning of the program ramp up period for demand flexibility. But then what happens when we get those projects out there? We want to start really assetizing this. One of my favorite words that I'm sure is not in a dictionary. But if we go to the next slide, fleet manager, that is how we accomplish this. So, now, okay, a project's out there. We ingest that project data. We match it up against that AMI meter data that has its baseline. And this is really the aggregation that's turning into a virtual power plant. So now we can see down to an hourly level what the real savings are that are accruing from this quote unquote asset at this point. And again, like I mentioned, just a little bullet point on project consumer finance. Doing everything using the data and the telemetry we have in this way is really the key to unlocking a lot of these other financing options. And especially as we move more towards decarbonization, electrification, not only are we doing this for electric consumption, but gas consumption as well. There's a whole bunch of different value streams out there. We need to put equivalence between them, be able to layer and stack them as appropriate to really find the best possible ways of incentivizing, all these goals we want to hit, namely decarbonization, electrification. And that's how we're doing that here and making sure that all stakeholders have a really transparent view into exactly what is being realized through these programs. And then if we keep moving here, we're going to have our transactable platform. So I just mentioned, making sure this is all transparent to all stakeholders. Well, in these programs and the open market approach that Sam was talking about, of course, we want to make sure these folks are qualified. They're putting in projects that are up to the standards that, utilities and load serving entities set. But once they do that, okay, well, now there's a whole bunch of folks in there doing these projects. They need to get paid for that in a way that everybody agrees to and can be fully auditable. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So not exactly a real flashy image to show you, but just showing you, what's real here and, the fact that we're actually building up these transactions and able to, remit payments on them. And that's something that's active today. So just wanted to share that final kind of pillar of the platform that makes all of this work appropriately. So if we keep going to tie this back a little bit to everything Sam was talking about, and especially to what you're going to hear more about today, really demand flexibility markets. And I like sharing this because I think that graphic is very neat and I like the little cartoony aspect of it. But it really showcases that, we can be really non-prescriptive. It's almost aside the point now what happened behind the meter. As long as we can measure a change in energy, it can be physical, it can be behavioral, a whole bunch of different business models are open. Just knowing that everyone is paid appropriately for those savings. And in the demand flex market, as we'll hear more about later, there's no picking winners. Those folks will rise to the top by nature of the results they're seeing. And it's open to a whole bunch of folks that are already doing great work today. Okay, so where is this going from here? What kind of traction do we have with this kind of model? That's what we're going to share on the next slide before I hand it over. All right, so, this is something I just wanted to share. Here we have this language around proposed decision. This was ruled on now in California. Way too much text on the slide, but just showing you this comes from this decision that came out where the CPUC in California took a close look at this model that's been operating major peak energy and power problems, for the summer of 22, 23, at least for now. Of course, that's probably going to extend onward. And, the governor issued a proclamation there, anybody come in with good ideas. And the commission really settled on this flex market concept, and they're referring to it as a market access program as one of the key ways to solve some of these issues. So just showing that, this is something that's real, that's out there, that's going to be heavily expanding. And it's a model that we feel has a really strong future. And we're going to hear more about this from the rest of the folks on the call. So just wanted to wrap up my little platform methods discussion with, what the business implications are here and what the market implications are for building these virtual power plants. So that's what I have. Appreciate you all listening to me. And with that, I'll hand it over to Letitia.
Thanks, Matt. Great job. Since we now have a sense of how demand flexibility and P4P programs work, let's do another audience poll. And this one is really geared towards, how ready do you think your organization is to participate in demand flexibility or P4P programs? And we'll use the following scale, 1 being not at all ready and 5 being extremely ready. And as before, go ahead and put your responses in, and and also while the responses are rolling in here, if you have any questions related to Sam or Matt's presentation, go ahead and send those through the question panel. It looks like 40% are somewhat ready. It's 70% are kind of in the somewhat to extremely ready. So moving more in that direction, and then some not quite ready yet. That's okay. So with that in mind, we're going to switch gears a little bit and get the utility perspective now on demand flexibility and P4P with a particular focus on the trade ally experience. So I think we can go to the next slide. And let me introduce you to Landon Williams. He holds a Master of Science degree from Appalachian State University in Building Science and Renewable Energy, and has been working in the energy efficiency industry ever since graduating in 2010. Prior to getting his advanced degree, he worked in construction, focusing on residential green building and also working in commercial solar. He's been with Duke Energy since 2013, where he started as a trade ally outreach representative, helping to develop and maintain a qualified group of contractors to sell, install, and implement Duke's energy efficiency portfolio. He's currently the senior program manager for a new energy efficiency offering, SmartPath, that's available to Duke Energy customers in North and South Carolina. And he's going to be presenting Engaging the Market, Duke Energy SmartPath program. Landon, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Letitia, and thanks everyone for joining today. I thought it might be prudent to start out with a little bit about Duke. So if you want to slide to the next slide for me. Thank you. So Duke Energy, knowing that not everyone on the call is in our service territory, we operate in 6 states and provide about 7.8 million customers with electricity. Currently, we're also the largest electric producer, currently generating 57,500 megawatts of electricity, so a pretty large number. And that number is always in flux as we retire old power plants, coal-fired, things that aren't as clean and good for the environment, and bring on new renewable energy sources. Duke also has a gas arm that we acquired, and we serve about 1.5 million customers with natural gas. One thing that is really important to us at Duke, and something that Duke Energy prides itself on, is being not only a great place to work for the employees that make Duke function, but we're also a leader in cultivating a diverse workplace. Forbes actually named us one of the best employers for diversity in 2020. And AMVETS said, that we are a very veteran-friendly employer, and named us the Employer of the Year for that. We can slide to the next slide. But the reason I'm here today is to talk about SmartPath, which is a pay-for-performance-ish program. We set out striving to create a pay-for-performance program, a true one, and have kind of modified the design of the program slightly. But what we have sought to do was to meet a hole in Duke's current energy efficiency offerings and portfolio by providing energy efficient incentives and rebates but also connecting customers with affordable third-party financing. Unlike our other programs who operate on a one-for-one technology swap and pay an average deemed savings, SmartPath looks at each project in a unique perspective, and we calculate the energy savings on the front end of the project through an energy calculator, working with our trade allies and customers to do so, and pay our incentives based upon each project, as opposed to a deemed savings and a one-for-one swap out like most programs operate today. And then the other thing we do that's unique for SmartPath is we partner with a small network of contractors who we work hand in hand with to train on the program and to be able to administer and implement the program for us, working with customers who are due paying, ratepayers. And we really rely on those trade allies to be the success of the program. Next slide. So the customer experience was always at the forefront of developing the program and kind of helped shape it to what it is today. And to make the program as easy as possible, we chose to work with that small group of TAs to develop projects. From the lead gathering to the install of the project. And this is how it kind of typically works, as you'll see below. A contractor would get a project lead, and they would go out and assess the savings. At that point, they'd come back to the office, put together a proposal, which would include a calculated energy savings in some sort of Excel format that our engineering team can review and, determine if it is in line with what we would expect to see in a savings for the technology that's proposed. And once that's done, that proposal goes then to the customer. And it also includes a quote for financing from our partner, the National Energy Improvement Fund. At that point, they complete the project if they choose to. And Duke helps to offset those project costs by paying an incentive on their actual savings that they earn. And then, what we ideally would like to see is them take advantage of the no upfront costs abilities of financing the project and use the savings that they see from lower energy bills to pay off that loan. And, the term of the loan ideally would line up with when the actual energy savings, pay off that loan. Next slide. So SmartPath, we developed it to be a trade ally centric program. But, what you might ask is, what do the trade allies get for being a part of SmartPath? And we tried to develop a few things that are unique to SmartPath to offer to them. And one of those, and the most important one's probably connecting them with the National Energy Improvement Fund to be able to offer, low cost, low interest rate financing on these EE projects, and really, take the upfront costs out of the equation and basically prevent that from being a barrier of entry into EE for our customers. The other thing we've done is we've allowed our customer or our trade allies working with the project to use their own energy savings calculators. So, an example of that would be Train Trace that the train company uses for their HVAC and mechanical installations. We're fine with them using that as long as we can get a calculator in an Excel type format that can be, reviewed and modified by our engineering team. We'll accept it. Part of that, though, is we also produced calculators for energy savings, and they're technology specific, right? There's a lighting one, a mechanical one, and we make those available to the SmartPath trade allies to use as well if they don't have a calculator that they are familiar with or are currently using. Another thing that we've offered is reduced project review time. So that's one of the reasons we asked for the calculator. But our goal is to, get the project in our system and reviewed within 5 business days and turn back around. Because from a trade ally's perspective, having a proposal, ready to go and a customer waiting for it, but then getting held up to determine what the incentive amount will be is a problem, right? You want to get that proposal in your customer's hands while they're excited about the job that you're doing and what you're talking about. So we've committed to shortening our review times for SmartPath on the initial enrollment, and also again when they submit their final documentation, we're committed to at most a 5-day review time before we pay incentives. And our incentive payment usually takes a 2-week to a month process at Duke. We've been able to cut that processing time down to about 2 days, so we can actually get the money back in the trade ally, or in some cases the customer's hands quicker. And the other thing that we've done is we've really limited the group of trade allies who participate in SmartPath. And we did that for a couple reasons. One was to provide trade allies who are willing to work with us and go above and beyond to create an energy savings calculator for the program, with the ability to be, kind of a smaller group that's able to offer that program to their customers. So since we're expecting a lot of them, we try to offer a lot back in return. We can go to the next slide. So, one of the things we've talked about offering to the customers is financing, and that being a barrier of entry that we saw at Duke and our other programs. And this is kind of the path that we offer for the financing journey. But I think it's important here to talk about that the pieces here are connected for both the customer and the trade ally. So what we do is we try to make this process easy. For the trade allies, they have a portal directly with NEIF where they can enter a small amount of information about the project from their energy calculator, and their customer can also access the same form and enter some company information. And what the trade ally then gets is a proposal from NEIF that they can attach to their proposal for the project. And it's nice and clean. Everything looks unique for that project and for that specific trade ally. And it breaks down payment terms and what, interest rates look like for that specific project. And by being able to offer, a low financing cost with low interest rates to the customers, we feel like we've enabled trade allies to get some jobs done that wouldn't have been otherwise. Next slide. And last but not least, one of the things that we have heard at Duke Energy, our trade allies who help administer all of our programs for years have been asking for, you guys have access to the customers. Can you provide us with leads? And that gets tricky at a utility because we have private personal information that we're not allowed to share, right? And for better or worse, our other programs haven't really sought to figure out a way to make that barrier crossable and accessible so that we can share leads with our customers and our trade allies. And for SmartPath, we've been able to do that. We have been able to go to customers who are interested in the program and ask for permission to share their information with a group of trade allies. And if they do so, then we cross that privacy barrier and we're still above board and legal. And our trade allies, in turn, are able to get to those customers quickly with a proposal that meets their needs and something they're excited about to help them save energy and participate in our programs. And I think that wraps up my portion. I will turn it back over to Letitia.
Great, thank you. And I think there's one more slide with your contact info. Yeah. Yeah, so thanks so much, Landon. Now I think we can move to the next slide, and I'll introduce you to Joey Landy. Joey oversees MCE's commercial, industrial, and agricultural energy efficiency programs, as well as MCE's Peak Flex Market program. Prior to his time at MCE, Joey focused his efforts on a broad range of energy efficiency and sustainability initiatives as a consultant at Energy Solutions and a portfolio manager at First Climate AG. His professional interests are delivering scalable programs that can optimize customer value, grid value, and GHG emissions avoidance. Joey will present the MC efficiency market and peak flex market presentation. So, Joey, take it away.
Thanks, Letitia. Can we just jump into the next slide? Gosh, is it just me or do I look younger in that photo? So I was hesitant to provide an introduction to MCE, but since we got one from Duke, I feel like I have to introduce MCE here. We are much smaller. MCE is California's first community choice aggregator. CCAs are joint powers authorities who are the default load serving entities in our jurisdiction. Our mission is squarely focused on addressing climate change by reducing energy-related greenhouse gas emissions with renewable energy and energy efficiency. We serve over 1 million residents and businesses here in Northern California across this group of counties and cities and towns. And like the investor-owned utilities in California, we are administrators of ratepayer-funded energy efficiency programs. And so also just like the IOUs, we strive to deliver value to customers through these programs, reach or exceed our goals, and deliver cost-effective programs. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how we landed on the efficiency market and the flex market before getting into the details of the programs. And it was really nice to hear Sam and Matt give an overview earlier. And I'm not going to lie, they covered a lot of the reasons why we've set up the program the way we have. So some of the thunder's been stolen, but I'll proceed. And I think for us, the concept of pay for performance and NMEC was always super promising. It's an accountable way of using ratepayer funding. It streamlines a bunch of administrative pain points, and it can bring a lot of value to customers. But the problem is right here, and this is that not all savings are equal. So Matt mentioned this and a graphic that was similar, but this is an overview of the avoided cost curve in California. And so these are the time-dependent values that contribute to the cost-effectiveness test for energy efficiency programs in California. So avoided costs are the avoided costs of electricity not consumed. And when extrapolated across the life cycle of an energy efficiency project, this is what creates the benefits and what lands in the benefits column in that cost-effectiveness test. So the moral of the story here is we can't set fixed rates for performance or for energy efficiency, and we have to value time-dependent savings differently. And I think in that view, the performance metric in pay for performance is not savings, it's benefits delivered. And so for us, it was also a timely shift to move towards benefits, as the goals for the program administrators in California are now grounded in benefits and not savings. Next slide, please. So the next big issue that we saw was the continued siloing of energy efficiency and demand response, where energy efficiency providers just don't have a lot of incentive to generate flexible loads or demand responsive projects. And traditional DR providers have little incentive to reduce customer demand on a daily basis because it only serves to erode the baseline for DR measurement. And so we wanted a program that could deliver both. And if you click next slide, we'll fill in that hole there, I think. Yeah, all right, so not quite centered, but yeah, this is about load shifting, right? Finding a way to tie together demand response and energy efficiency in a meaningful way under one program umbrella so we can be doing both. Next slide, please. So Matt also had something up similar on this. And Sam also flagged a lot of the reasons why a marketplace model or market access model can help to mitigate risk. That's all true, and it's a key rationale for us running a program this way. We're never going to be perfect at picking winning solutions, but I want to emphasize another reason, which is the importance of customer value and how that's brought out through a diversity of services. Our traditional program partners focus on a niche customer segment or a smaller group of technologies. So for us to do more, that just means more contracts and launching more direct contracts with program partners. And yes, risk is a part of that, but there's a simple administrative burden there, especially for a relatively small team like ours. And you know, if we want to cover this broad range of technologies and solutions behind the meter, that can really, really add up and detract from what we want to do and helping get more done. And then lastly, opening up funding through a market access model, it's really a stimulus for investment. And what I think what we want to show through this model is that if you're a provider of valuable behind the meter projects, our service area is hopefully going to be one of the best or the best place for you to do business. And we want both local companies to be able to benefit from local programs, and we want non-local companies to want to do business here. And I think those are the types of things that the market access model can help stimulate. Next slide, please. So we've landed on two specific programs. For us, we started with the commercial efficiency market, and that is largely grounded in some of the features that we've described in this presentation. Payments are based on the value of benefits delivered, and we pay out on the maximum cost-effective value. We also have MCE's Peak Flex market, and the Peak Flex market grounds hourly payments over the course of the summer in savings generated in the peak period. And so those are load shed or load shifting savings. It's technology agnostic, so that can be delivered via any number of solutions. And then there's also an event-based demand response component to that program that's paid at a premium rate and is roughly aligned with some of the statewide triggers for flex alerts or demand response events. And overall, the marketplace together, the efficiency market and the Peak Flex market, they offer simplicity, flexibility, and transparency. And I think that's it. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks, Joey. I think we can move to the next slide. All right. Now our last speaker, Andrew Kraus, is currently the Director of Innovation at Northern Pacific Power Systems, a leading regional integrator of whole home electrification systems in Northern California, serving Sonoma, Napa, and Marin counties. In his role, Andrew leads the development of customer initiatives that include residential solar, battery backup, electrical vehicle charging, and the electrification of HVAC, and other efforts to support a flexible and futuristic grid. He earned a Master's of Science in Sustainability at ASU, where he studied the science of social technical transitions, and was also adjunct faculty in the PSM Solar Engineering and Commercialization Program. And Andrew is going to bring us, as you can see here, the trade ally perspective on demand flexibility. So Andrew, dive on in.
Yeah, hi. I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. I've had to call in today. Can you confirm?
Yes. Loud and clear.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to be here today to represent what I think is the archetype of the long tail of contractors that really power these types of programs and initiatives. We've had the privilege to work with Recurve and MCE on the Peak Flex pilot that Joey mentioned. And so I wanted to review a little bit of how that affects our business, and also bring in maybe some considerations that weren't so obvious when we started this. So as mentioned, Northern Pacific Power Systems is a regional local installer with a legacy of installing residential solar systems. And because of the territory we're in, we've also moved into battery systems for homes. But we're also looking to the future of EV charging and electrification of the home. And we serve a 3-county area. So we're not a national contractor. We're a local contractor of medium size. What that allows us to do is actually develop the local workforce and create branding and messaging and engagement strategies that are really tailored to our area, which I think also kind of makes us unique. And because of the area we live in, we are seeing a lot of uptake in the language of whole home electrification and flexible devices. So we have a very strategic focus in adapting and growing our business to that. Except that to date, the real barometer for success in those integrated systems has been grid services programs, which are largely inaccessible even for a medium-sized company like ourselves. So for those of you who are familiar with the CAISO DR market, you have to be a substantial size and have essentially a dedicated policy team and grid services team to be able to access those markets. And then there's also financial resources that have to be contributed for kind of marginal gain. So it's definitely an economy of scale thing, and we are orders of magnitude shy of that in ability to participate. What Peak Flex did for us, and again powered by Recurve, was allow us to essentially play in the sandbox. We brought 260 customers to the Peak Flex market this year. We were able to do it incrementally. We were able to A/B test messages, and also this year we hope to test different basically sales strategies that work for our business model and also for Peak Flex, with the savings per home sort of being the barometer of our success. So as a trade ally, I would say, speaking on behalf of ourselves and other people like us, these types of platforms really have a chance to create a network effect with the long tail of local and probably optimal contractors to be testing through the different sales strategies mentioned on this call and the different unprescribed technologies. So that's sort of what I hope to contribute to this group, and where I think the power of this type of program comes from.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Andrew. I think we can go to the next slide. All right. As we get ready for the audience Q&A here, just want to put a reminder in that you can submit your questions through the control panel in the questions pane. And we've also already gotten a couple in already, so we'll start off with those. But just a reminder, if you have questions, push them through that channel. We can go to the next slide. All right. And presenters, if you want to turn your cameras on too. And great job, everybody. Okay, so this first question that we got in, I think we got a number of questions actually around kind of the details. So this first one goes to Matt, and it's, how are you able to draw comparisons between similar companies to generate baselines?
Absolutely. Really, really important question. So I made a brief reference earlier to what we call grid meter. I'm going to call an audible, see if I can drop the link in here. You know, we publish everything in a very open source way. So I'll send you the link here in a moment that shares the entire methods, the DOE and NREL funded study and the whole report, along with the actual code that runs all this. And in the methods section on there, you'll see the way in which we do that kind of matching. So, you know, there's the baselining for a meter against its own usage, but then when we do these comparisons, on the residential side, we typically match off of load shape. So we'll look for similar load shapes. And in a lot of cases, we'll do that on the commercial side as well, though we might also combine things like NAICS codes and compare more against similar business types. So that's all in there. And, you know, happy to talk in detail about this offline as well. And Dr. Adam Shear, our VP of Analytics and Data Science, pioneered all this, and he'd be happy to speak directly on it as well. So let me drop this in here for you all. Yeah, so hopefully that answered your question.
Great. Thank you. So this next question kind of gets into, a little bit more about how aggregators and trade allies work within the demand flex market, and how active are they? And I think Matt, you could speak to this directly. And then the second part of the question, I think everybody could chime in on, is what capabilities do the aggregators or trade allies need to be successful?
Very good question. So yeah, I mean, really everybody's active, and especially with this market access program that we shared, it's ramping up really, really quickly. And back to part of my little spiel earlier, getting started is all found in the data. So what we want to do is support these aggregators by finding the customers that are going to be the best fit for their businesses. Because the reality is a lot of these folks are out there, trying to sell their services and products on their own merits. And now we're offering, these demand side programs that are going to further incentivize those. So, they still benefit from these targeting lists effectively. So we'll use that targeting, and, we're very careful about protecting customer PII and all of that good stuff. A lot of NDAs in place and all of this. But saying, hey, you're a smart thermostat provider, let's find those folks who are using too much on cooling and peaking in the afternoon, and get that kind of information to them so they can more effectively market. So, everybody's active, and we're working really hard on that right now to provide those lists that are really specific to each, technology type and business model that these aggregators have.
Letitia, can I chime in with one other point on that? I think what we would really love to see is kind of what Andrew has outlined, this future state where providers who are active within the market develop their own sub-programs and programs that live within the market but are really tailored to their group of customers. And one way we can help do that is by either co-branding or helping market the offer. We are able to do that the more that we know about what is being offered to customers, which is currently a blind spot for us in some cases. We know what value gets passed through, but being able to communicate that requires some more information about how providers are interacting with customers. And I think hopefully that's something we can work to help strengthen the customer offers that providers bring to the table.
No, that's great perspective. Anyone else want to chime in on that before we move to the next question?
I'll say one thing. This is Andrew. The way we see it is maybe the inverse of the way that a lot of program design sees it. So we're asking customers to rapidly adopt a lot of new and unfamiliar equipment. And even though there's very strong incentives coming down the pipe, just like any other retailer, it kind of starts with us educating consumers, creating pathways for them to, in this case, evaluate an entire home energy upgrade essentially overnight is what's being asked. And so it's really complicated. And where I think local companies like Northern Pacific Power can actually really do a lot of innovation here is we have now a standard weights and measures to verify success of different customer engagement strategies. And so that's what we're up to. We're looking at different ways to engage customers for different devices, and this gives us the flexibility to compare those on a common basis, which is very, very helpful.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew. And kind of on that point, another question that came in was, what are the challenges for utilities looking to implement these types of programs? So, Joey, Landon, do you guys want to chime in on that first?
Yeah, I'm
Sure, I
happy
can
to.
take a quick crack.
Go for it.
Okay, yeah. For us, it's squarely data. We, without getting into the weeds too much of how we receive AMI data, how it's collected and provided MCE, it's a challenging process, and there are tough rules around data security, how data can be shared, who has access to what, and to generate a marketplace level program just requires a lot of it. And prior to kicking these programs off, we did not really have that infrastructure in place. And so it's taken years to develop. And for other regions across the U.S. where AMI data isn't available, I have no idea how it'd be done, or where there is no avoided cost curve to be able to value time-dependent savings. It's a different framework to look at that type of program model.
Yeah, I would echo what Joey said for Duke. AMI data is absolutely part of our issue, and we're working to remedy some of those problems. Another issue that we run into and ran into with the development of SmartPath, which, like I said, was intended to be a true pay-for-performance program, is frankly our other programs competing with that. We're asking in a pay-for-performance model for customers to wait on the incentive money until some level of review verification's been done, and that could take a few months to a year's time when they could participate in another energy efficiency program that Duke offers and get the incentive right up front. So honestly, part of the issue is competing programs that we also offer.
Okay. Does anyone else want to chime in on that? I know one of the other questions that we had kicked around before, and maybe Sam, this might be an area for you to chime in on, is, with a program like this, are there any suggestions for how this could work in parallel with other existing programs, and where there might be overlap and overlapping customers?
Yeah. There are a variety of different ways that can be handled. One, like Landon had mentioned with SmartPath, it can be an alternative path for customers that may other programs that may cover the same segments or measures. You could choose one or the other. That's an option. You could focus the program to have, a unique set customer segment or measures. The challenge with that is it starts to become a little more, prescriptive and restrictive. Incentives can also be designed to be incremental to those from existing programs, so that you're still able to compensate sort of the high performers. There's also the ability to bring in sub-metering, particularly for certain, major devices like solar and storage. You can use that approach. And another approach is just to wait until there's a long enough time to establish a new baseline. Customers can participate in traditional programs. Once they've got a baseline from that, now you can move over to, this alternative approach. So those are just some examples of different ways to sort of navigate the overlap between these programs and others.
I'd also add that we do see real value in some of our traditional energy efficiency programs as well. Some customers need a different level of service, assistance in procurement, technical feasibility analyses, whatever it is. Like there's a role for some of our existing programs where we have a contracted partner who we can work with directly to provide a specific service to those customers. And then there are other program types that just don't fit in this model, but are nevertheless still extremely valuable. And I would flag strategic energy management as being a great example of that, where it's an incredibly valuable service to customers. It also leans on meter data, but doesn't really fit in the population level NMEC framework that we leverage in the marketplace programs.
That's great. Matt, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I think you guys all nailed it.
Okay, great. So our last question here, and this is just to kind of, wrap this up here, thinking about, the CPUC decision, which is obviously a big step, in bringing demand flexibility, into markets and, increasing awareness around that. I'd like to throw this question out to the group here, what do you think will help, most help stakeholders and, getting on board with this approach, or are adopting this in their own territories.
I think Landon touched on an important one: financing and the ability to be paid in advance of metered savings coming through for providers. That's a real issue. We are also working with NEIF on some solutions there, but it doesn't work for everybody to wait a year to be compensated for value delivered. So something we're very much aware of and working on.
Great. Any other thoughts?
I'll just
yeah, this is Andrew.
I'll go for it.
I would add one from the contractor perspective. It's interesting because the other big CPUC decision that's on the table that will affect us is the successor tariff to net metering 2, which they're now calling net billing. And if you were to look at our business model and the homeowner economics, you could basically line out each device as its own cash flow series, and the solar is now pretty diminished unless you couple it with on-site batteries and other things that could help attract funding from market access. So we're sort of at this state where the equilibrium is shifting. There's going to be a new sort of optimal combination of things in town, and again, that comes with the need to figure out how to finance it, whether it's incremental or all at once. But it's quite the puzzle. And so from our standpoint and from a consumer standpoint, what we can't do is just sort of stay static and wait. We need to keep moving, but we also have a lot of uncertainty around new small programs like MAP and sort of declining large programs like net metering. So it's created a route forward for us, even though it's not sizable enough to support our industry. It's sort of a line in the sand for where we ought to go next, which I think is also kind of helpful.
That's great.
I would add, one other important element is just sort of a willingness to try new things and sort of dip your foot in the water, because this is a different approach to things. It's not necessarily what everyone's familiar and comfortable with. And it may seem, very, very different and challenging up front because it's new, but then, you can find out from this that it actually makes a lot of things easier. And there also may be concerns with, how regulators may perceive certain things or what restrictions there might be. And, there are ways to work around those things and move forward. So, don't assume that certain barriers are a showstopper, and just give it a try.
Great. Thanks, Sam. So we did get one last question in that I think will take a little bit to unpack. So, and since we're running up on our time, I would encourage folks to reach out to our panelists here. I do want to note one correction. Matt Burton's email address is actually matt.burton@recurve.com, although he would be welcome to join the Guidehouse team.
Thanks. Mike is going to bounce back right now, but thank you, Tisha.
Yeah. And on that note, there's one more slide. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for taking the time to be a part of this presentation today. And you'll notice the GIF is kind of a play on the title for this because, hopefully the attendees, and thank you for making time to join us, will note that demand flexibility can be a win-win-win for utilities, trade allies, and for customers. So with that, I'll pass it over to Anastasia to wrap things up here. And thanks again.
Thank you all so much for joining and participating in our webinar today. And thank you to all of our speakers. You did an amazing job. And thank you to our moderator. On behalf of AESP, we are so honored you could be here with us today.